Okay, welcome again, back by popular demand. We have Ammon, the osteopath, with us again. Last time we looked at upper back problems and neck, so I thought what we'd do this week would be look at lower back and issues around your lower back. So Ammon, welcome, and I cannot wait to find out what exercises you have for me today.
All right, yeah, as you mentioned, so we touched on sort of upper back and neck last time, just basically. So we thought we'd do a bit of lower back today. Obviously, with lower back problems, it can be quite complicated. There can be a number of different reasons you'll have it. Today, I thought we'd just kind of touch on hips mostly, because they're probably one of the biggest, or let's say more common reasons people will have some lower back problems for, and that can be either kind of tightness through the hip or potential weakness. So we'll probably go through a few kind of stretches and mobility drills first, and I want to throw in a couple of strength and stability exercises for the hips as well. Do bear in mind that some of the strength exercises are a little bit difficult. So if you do have like back issues now, maybe don't just jump straight into them, and maybe consult someone first before doing that. But yeah, so we can just do that basically.
Right, what have we got to start off with?
All right, let's okay, let me just move my laptop just on a little coffee table here. So pretty basic one to start with, which a lot of people can't do, is a squat, and it's a good stretch for your lower back, and not just a normal squat by your feet sort of raised like mine are here. I want you to go flat on your feet, and as you can see, I can't do it, so most people will probably need some help. You can just grab on the edge of a table and just kind of squat down. The idea is you want to be like quite deep into the squat, so best to hold on to something if you can't do it. Let's see, yeah, so yeah, that's perfect. So I'm assuming you can't do a squat without holding on to something if you wanted to. Yeah, okay. So anyway, yeah, to just stretch out your lower back muscles a lot. It just gets the hips into a deep stretch as well.
How long would you keep that for?
Just maybe like 30 seconds or so. If you really have bad lower back problems and you can't do that, you could just, I mean, your most basic one is just kind of tucking your knees into your chest like that. You don't have to
so the knees to chest, that one.
Yeah, so it's essentially the same thing, but the squat's just a bit deeper, and you kind of
okay. So hold that for 30 seconds. If you've got something to hold on to, helps with balance.
Yeah, so that's a pretty basic one. So a couple of basic glute stretches. So hips, again, really important with lower back problems. The musculature kind of blends through the pelvis and into the lower back through the glutes, and at the front of your hips, those muscles go straight through your stomach and attach onto your lower spine. So huge muscle groups. So glute-wise,
so you're really thinking about. You're not necessarily looking at your lower back, just try and stretch your lower back. You're looking at how other muscles impact the pain.
Yeah, exactly. And the lower back's sort of got nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, because it's stuck between your hips and your thoracic spine, which is your upper back. So if there's a problem at your upper back, which is really stiff from sitting, for example, at a desk, or your hips are really tight for whatever reason, your lower back just has to crack on and do the job, and can end up with some issues. The knee's another similar example. It's stuck between the ankle and hip, and nowhere to go. So less common where someone comes in and it's purely the lower back that's causing the issue from a mechanical perspective.
Okay.
So anyway, good glute stretch. You can just lie on your back, and you want to pull your hip across. And most mistakes people make, or change legs, so you can see, is they'll kind of roll through their back a lot more, which is okay if you want to stretch your back a little bit more. But if you keep your back a bit more flat and just make sure you pull the hip only, you'll feel a much stronger stretch on the hip itself. So you can give that a quick try, see if we need to troubleshoot anything. Yeah, looks okay. Can you feel a stretch?
Yeah.
Yeah, so while you're there, we'll do the second stretch. So again, hold this for about 30 seconds or so, or 20 seconds or so. Next stretch while you're lying there is to bring that, in this case, I'm going to use my right leg over the left knee, just the ankle, and then you're going to weave through the inside, grab onto that left knee and pull in. Again, you should be feeling that on your right hip.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of works the, what we'd say, the external rotation of the hip. So the hip joint there is kind of pivoting into
you see quite a few people when they do this, they end up like rolling around all over the place.
Yeah, so that might just be they're like too tight to really get into that position. And if that's the case, you can really start off by just kind of relaxing the leg there, maybe pushing it with your hand.
Okay.
So there's always modifications that can be made if need be. So yeah, so that was an external rotation. Little nice one for internal rotation, which is often neglected. So if you sort of sit kind of, just leaning back like that. Yeah, exactly. So if you rotate your knee in, and then you can just alternate that. Important thing here is to not to let your hip roll too much like that, because again, you're bringing your back into it. Yeah, exactly. And you won't feel it in your hips really. So you want to.
Yeah, that feels a lot.
You can feel that difference, right? It's quite a deep stretch when you get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that kind of deals with the internal, external rotation of the hip, which is really important. So another big important one is the hip flexor group. As I mentioned earlier, bring this up a tiny bit. They sit sort of attached at the front of your hip, and they kind of go through your stomach into your lower back. So big driver in the hip. Often tight because when you're sitting a lot, the hip flexors are in a kind of shortened position. So what I like to do with this, it's a bit more dynamic, and again, there's different stages. But I like to incorporate some lower back and hip movement into the stretch. So what I mean by that is, so you're going to go into a kind of lunged position, like so. You're going to keep your back straight, and you kind of want to rotate your pelvis forward. And to do that, you can simply just tense your, in my case, right butt cheek, and that will kind of force that rotation through the pelvis. But automatically, I feel quite a strong stretch there. From there, you want to add some movement. Let's bring the camera up a tad for that. So what we're going to work with is rotation. So you're going to rotate the torso one way, maintaining that stretch, then rotate the other way 5 times. Yeah. Can you feel the stretch on that left hip in the first place?
Yeah. Through here.
Yeah.
And it works as well, the pelvis movement as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's important to keep that while you're doing the movement. So rotate each way, maybe say 5 to 7 times. Go that way as well, yeah. So you're just getting like nice hip and spinal movement while you stretch it. Yeah. And the last thing you want to do is add some side bending. So we just worked rotation. So side bending is, I'll turn that way, is that way. So let your hips swing into it. Don't stay too stiff, but you want to do 5 one way, in this case my left, and then 5 to the right. Often mistake you can make is just doing that. And as you can see, just my upper body's moving. You really want to kind of get your hips swinging into that for the mobility aspect. Okay,
so some rotation and then some side movement as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So try and do just, let's say 5 of each movement. It's a really good warm up, after circuit break, if you're playing golf and things like that, just to get that rotational aspect to the hips as well, as a side note. So that kind of deals with, let's say, a basic mobility side of things. So just 2 strength exercises I want to touch on would be your single leg squat and single leg deadlift. Now, the reason these are important is because your hip stabilizes, which, you can just say like your glute medius, the gluteus medius, which is one muscle group. It functions primarily on a single leg. So you can squat like 150 kilos on 2 legs. You'll never strengthen that muscle until you start doing some single leg work. And it's often why people who run a lot will start getting knee problems, because running is essentially a single leg. You're on one leg 100% of the time. So you don't have leg strength on a single leg, you know, hip starts caving in a little bit, starts to get some knee problems or lower back. So single leg squat sounds difficult, but doesn't have to be. We can use a chair in this case. So I'll just grab my dining room chair. And the height of the chair makes the difference in difficulty. So I'll show you first. You're going to take one leg off. You're just going to sit down and stand up. Sit down, stand up. If that's very difficult, you can sit on something higher. If you want it harder, you can sit on something lower.
So you'd start on one leg?
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to do this, am I? Come on. Oh, yeah.
That's good, yeah. So, I mean, reps-wise, just go reps to fatigue, because it just varies from person to person how many you can do. You should feel the leg wobbling a bit. Yeah.
That's because I've got skinny legs. That's why.
Yeah. Didn't want to say, but.
Okay, that's a good
anyways,
one.
that's a really good exercise. Also, if you're a runner, 100% you should be doing these two. And the last one's a single leg deadlift. So again, you don't really need weights or anything for this. The movement goes. So again, balance on the one leg, and you're just going to come down, ideally to like the letter T, like that, and come back up. Common mistakes people will make is they round their back to touch the floor. It's not wrong, but it's not great because you're trying to really focus on hinging the hip. So by rounding the back, you're not really, you're kind of taking movement away from the hip to a degree. So your cue to stop is when your hamstring reaches full stretch. So for me, that's here. If you're a yogi, it might be lower. If you're you, it's probably going to be higher.
My cue to stop will come on very quickly. Right, okay, so.
Try and straighten that back leg out a bit more if you can. So are you feeling a stretch on the hamstring of the left leg?
That's something I definitely need to work on.
Yeah, okay. So you can see how different yours was compared to mine in terms of how far you can go, and that's fine. You wouldn't be making any progress if you saw the person next to you going much further and you're trying to get there by rounding your back. You're not really training anything. So there's a few things you're doing there. Is by being on that single leg, you're training the hip stabilizers we talked about. At the same time, you're getting some lengthening in the hamstring, and you're also kind of activating the glutes and the lower back on the opposite side. So I like that exercise because it encompasses a lot of things in just one exercise. So I could split that up into maybe 4 different exercises if you wanted to break it down. But if you're not in too much pain and you're able to do that, it's a good one.
That's something that I will rewatch this video and work at, because I think that's a weakness of mine. That kind of ability to hinge at the hip, lengthening hamstrings.
Yeah, it's important, especially hinging at the hip when it comes to people weight training or weightlifting is often where they'll go wrong on kind of deadlift movements into their back. So it's an important move, but just work within your range.
So
someone like your body type.
So it's when you do kettlebell swings as well, a lot of people they turn it into a squat when you should be really sort of hinging more at the waist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's the hinging aspect, and often because they're doing it, maybe it's a high intensity training class and they're getting fatigued, they'll start rounding at the back.
Yeah.
That's another one. The squat's not really wrong. It's not damaging. It's just a wrong way to do the exercise. But anyway, so back to someone with your body type, I was going to say that you're fairly strong, I'd say, but you're you're super tight. So you would definitely need to work more on the mobility side of things.
Yeah.
And probably less on the strength. But you could definitely do with stability work, which is like single leg things. But you probably don't need to be aiming to squat 120 kilos or whatever. So that's that scale I always talk to people about, which is if you're super flexible, maybe a yogi, or super strong, maybe a bodybuilder. Even yogis or very flexible people, hypermobile people will get problems because they're lacking a bit of strength, and bodybuilders are lacking mobility. So ideally, you want to be kind of somewhere in between, where you can gauge for yourself what you need to work on.
Okay. Yeah. That's really good. You've given us lots of different exercises there to look at. I think the key you mentioned earlier is concentrating on, there's so many different areas that affect the back. It's not just the back itself, it's like the mobility in your hips.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to stretch off, stay flexible around that area. That's obviously a massive impact on your back.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, you could link like the foot to how the hip functions and therefore the lower back. It gets very complicated, but we just keep it basic for now. And it's very much down to the individual. Like your mechanics would be very different to someone else with the same problem. So you might have the same problem diagnostically, but you'll have it for a different reason mechanically. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you again for joining us. It's been most useful. I will go and play back the video and work on my single leg deadlifts. But thank you very much. Really informative as always and very useful. Cheers.
No worries. Thanks for having us. All right. Take care.